welcome to another edition of Hit Subscribe's Facebook Live. I'm Amanda. This is Eric. We're going to talk about blog posts. We handle a lot of blog posts at Hit Subscribe. So we're going to talk about some elements that you might be curious about, talk about SEO, we'll talk about length, and we'll talk about readability, all sorts of good stuff. So you wanted to kind of do an intro. We're kind of going to open up by talking about like the elements of a good blog post. And you were going to kind of zoom out and talk about mission, right?
I wanted to get to right down to the epistemological. Sorry. Let me reboot that.
Biblical. You're getting biblical.
This is a question that sort of comes up with clients and prospects in like sales call type situations, which is we want you Hit Subscribe to write good blog posts. So I have these conversations about what is a good blog post, and I have some philosophical opinions on this. Like, there are two ways to think of this question. Number one is the way that you're probably all tuning in for, and I think it'd be better if we talked about here, which is like what makes a good blog post, almost in an artistic sense. Like, if I'm going to go write something, is this writing good? You might ask that the same way you would ask, like, is this song I'm listening to good, or is this painting good? As a content marketing agency that's trying to help clients realize return on investment, we have kind of a different definition of good. So a good blog post is one that meets the mission we set out for it. And I think that maybe we cool our jets on that and talk about what you're probably tuning in to see, which is like, hey, I want to write. Like, how do I do good writing? Well, so I want to offer the caveat that what we're going to talk about here is less about like commercial goals and Hit Subscribe's charter with our clients, and more a conversation about, how you can do well writing your blog posts.
But to that point, having a mission for your blog post, like something that you want to achieve, something that you want the reader to walk away with, is really key to writing a good one. So having a mission and achieving that mission is a good, important element of the blog post. But at Hit Subscribe, we do look for a couple key things in each and every one of our blog posts, and those are kind of like the elements where it's a deal breaker if you don't include them.
So all of our blog posts have commercial missions, but you're talking about like any blog post, like these are things that are mission agnostic, like what you would look for in any blog post that any Hit Subscribe author is writing and anyone out there is writing.
Yeah, so the stuff I'm going to talk about is to avoid the thing where the blog post is a wandering blurb of text with nothing to kind of like break anything up, and you don't really know what you were supposed to take away from it, and your eyes kind of cross halfway through, and then you're like, I don't know what this is all about. All this stuff kind of funnels you towards direction and making your reader work with you to realize what you're talking about. So, having a mission, working towards that mission, having an introduction. So an intro is one of the key things that all of our blog posts have to have. In that intro, there should be a sentence that I call this post is about sentence that clearly spells out what you're going to cover in the post. So there's no question about what you're going to learn if you read on and what the subject material is going to be. And I say also a good thing to include is how is the reader's life going to be better by reading it? Why should they, what are the benefits of learning the stuff that you have to teach? And then the last thing that we look for is a conclusion. So, something to kind of round things out so it doesn't kind of like peter off into nothingness. We also require that you have subheadings to divide up your text and kind of give direction to each little chunk. Other than that, those are like the core elements. Is there anything?
I'm trying to think if I flip off my commerce hat and like channel myself blogging for the last 10 years. I guess again, good is kind of hard because I've written some posts that have gone viral, and like 50% of the people reading it would have been like, yeah, I love this. This is wonderful. And the other 50% are like, I hate you. And if they're commenting on Reddit, like, I want you to die, and all the horrendous things people say there. So you can write a post that really resonates with some and unresonates with others, or you can write kind of like a milquetoasty post. So good can be very subjective, but I'm trying to think if there's a way to describe like what makes posts generally like successful in the sense that people read them all and are engaged. So I think some of the things that you've mentioned.
Can I ask you if those posts that you're talking about had intros, conclusions, and subheads? Because I bet they did.
Certainly subheadings. The posts that I've written over the years, introduction. I used to do kind of narrative things that maybe would go better in stories, but not as well in blog posts, especially commercial interest blog posts. Like tell a long, almost unrelated narrative in the beginning and then jump to the topic. Those could be successful, but they're not. Not for everybody. That's not what I'd recommend.
Yeah,
as a
you have to
strategy.
be a particularly engaging author not to do a this post is about type of thing. Like you have to be masterful, and I would consider you masterful. You're an excellent writer. So people will read you for the joy of devouring your words and the way that you say things. So you have to be a talent to bypass some of these rules. Kind of the way that I put it is that you need to learn how to become such an expert in these very predictable frameworks. You have to become an expert at them before you can start to play with them effectively. Kind of like the way Picasso learned how to be an excellent realistic painter before he could start to play with form effectively.
Did you just obliquely compare me to Picasso? Because I can just drop a mic and walk away at this point.
All right, I got the rest of this Facebook Live. Peace.
But one thing I would say, did you mention the idea that you want to speak to a person?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So this isn't something that we have as a listed requirement in order to turn in a hit subscribe blog post. You have to speak to a persona, but I do ask editors to look for it, and we do have a persona kind of laid out. So a persona is an intended audience member. We tell people to write to a person who is in a role, like the ideal reader that you would want to target. So if you're just kind of this blog post is for the world, blah, you'll speak to nobody. So you got to picture what is the person that you want to speak to, and you write to that person, and that will give you a coherence of message. For professional blog posts, for instance, if we have something where in one point they're talking about as an employee you're going to want to take the following steps, and then in the next paragraph it's and you want to make sure that your employees do whatever, all of a sudden you got a record scratch moment where your reader's wait, I thought this post was for me. Or if your intended audience was IT leadership, say, you already lost them in that paragraph where you're talking about as an employee you want to do this. So that's why it's so important to pick a persona and write to it. No record scratches. No record scratches at hit subscribe. Our records play clean.
Yeah, I'd also say good blog posts, because people read blog posts not the way they read something like a textbook. A blog post is light reading entertainment.
Yes.
So beyond just subheadings, you want things that break up the text, some images, screenshots, stock photos, I guess, but do things like add lists, bulleted lists, anything that makes it not just a wall of text that kind of keeps readers.
Yeah, this is moving into something that we were planning on covering in this Facebook Live is how do we improve readability. So you're talking about kind of scannability, having things really, your eyes kind of flow through, making things easy to kind of consume quickly on a lunch break. If we're talking about pure readability metrics type of things, the difference between a difficult to read piece and an easy to read piece from sort of syntax speaking, is that you want to cut out needless words. You want as much active voice as you can possibly fit in there, and less passive voice is the most effective way to say what you're trying to say, but oftentimes it's not. Short sentences interspersed with your long sentences. If you tend to lean towards the long, if you break things up with short sentences, that's great. And I can't say enough good things about transitions, and not just words that transition, also, or conversely, or phrases on the other hand, but actual signposts in your text that say where you are in your argument, saying so now that we've covered blah, we're going to move on to talking about blah, or so sure, you knew these three things, but you might be asking whatever. Well, that's great, because we're gonna go there next. Things that help the reader kind of ease into the next phase of your argument. That's my readability tips.
So I'd say for readability, get yourself a readability checker. If you're
Yeah.
using WordPress, you can just use Yoast, which I think comes with every WordPress install. But any of them are going to have something you can plug in. You'll hate it at first. You'll argue with
Yeah.
it and think that
Oh
it doesn't know
yes.
what it's talking
Oh
about.
yes.
And in a sense, you might even be right. But like the thing is, those readability checkers are based not just on arbitrary things that the makers of them came up with. It's a lot of data about what keeps people reading blog posts versus
Yes.
what makes them bounce and not. And so they're building all this intelligence and giving you a score, of how you're doing. And you could think of that less as this thing is telling me I'm a bad writer, but I know I'm a good writer, and more that it's giving you feedback. Maybe a good way to think of it is like how likely this post is to retain the attention of the average reader.
That's a really good way to put it. It's unfortunate that readability metrics often put it in ways of like grade level or like is your reading grade school easy or college level difficult, and you would wear the college level difficult like a badge of honor. Most people would like. I'm an expert. I'm speaking to experts, and I'm intelligent, and I speak with the authority of an educated person. I don't I don't sit around and like help people know which crayons to pick to color. Uh, but it really is a matter of how hard is your reader having to work for the great ideas that you have to share with them. You don't want them to work hard for it. You want to make language be just this clear, beautiful container for your ideas to just flow through, as easily as possible. You don't want to get things mixed up. All right, let's move on to SEO. This is going to be your domain. So things that you should avoid including because it's going to hurt your marketing goals or it's going to hurt SEO in some way.
This gets into the mission territory that I talked about earlier. So if you're writing a blog post and your goal is to entertain, like it's art, you're starting a blog and you just like to write, these things tend not to matter as much. But when you get into the realm of SEO, usually you've got some kind of mission. I mean, you're probably not worried about your monthly organic traffic if you don't have a commercial interest. And that's where the subjective definition of good can start to clash with the mission-oriented definition of good. So for instance, as a perfect example, if you're writing for SEO, there are different rules, and I won't get into the subtleties, but like you want to include just the right amount of links to both internal, like other blog posts you've written, and also to external sites, but not too many and not too few. It's a Goldilocks thing. Now you might write this blog post and maybe you intend it as some kind of roundup, or you just want to include a lot of links, a lot of places for the reader to go for more information. That might make your blog post good as far as the people reading it are concerned, but bad if your goal is for SEO, because you can actually overdo it with the links and have trouble ranking. So are there things you should avoid including that might hurt SEO or content marketing efforts? Yes, and almost too many to go into in a video about the general subject of what is a good blog post. So I guess I'll leave a placeholder and maybe we do a future video on this. But if your goal is to write good prose, the way that like an excellent editor can help you with, it's not easy necessarily to synthesize that with a commercial interest goal. It can be done, and that's what we as a business do. But I guess if you're trying to become a good writer, do that first. And then once you've kind of gotten there and you're satisfied with the way people react to your writing, that's when to come and think about kind of the more subtle concerns of SEO. I will say, in the broadest sense, if you do some of the things we've already talked about, it'll hurt SEO if your post is really unreadable or if it's a big wall of text, because SEO at the end of the day is really about people reading to the bottom of what you've written. So there is overlap between a good in the subjective sense post and a good SEO post, because in both cases you're not alienating readers and causing them to leave. You want to keep them reading. So that's where the overlap is. So just as you would with good prose, for SEO purposes, avoid doing things that are jarring or create a bad user experience. Don't blast them with that pop-up to sign up for their mailing list.
I hear those are effective. Not
might be, but
not on me. They're not.
not for like on-page SEO, the landing page.
Yeah.
So we've got this question too. How long is a good blog post?
Yep. How long is it? I need an exact number.
1,200 words.
Yep.
Done.
And we're out.
Again, this is mission versus aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
Mission-wise, a good blog post, if you're trying to rank, is a little bit longer or maybe even a lot longer than all the other posts you're trying to rank above. More content is generally better. You can get to the far end of the spectrum with like a 20,000 word blog post that might start to tail off, but until you're writing a mini book, longer is better if you're trying to outrank.
If you're trying to outrank. I've read some great blog posts that are like 300 to 500 words though. We don't write anything that short.
If it's just for, I mean, you know, you can see beautifully composed tweets that are 280 characters. So if it's just a question of like prose or the pleasure of reading what the person has to say, then the answer is there isn't a good length. It's just however long you need to communicate your ideas. In my case, that's usually probably more words than should be necessary. It varies.
1,200 words.
I don't know. Do you have any like good heuristics at all for like length? Maybe not.
No, but I will say if you read a lot of blog posts, you'll start to get a feel, that something is shorter than normal or longer than normal. And I do think 1,200 words is very close to that sweet spot that will feel like a normal, like this is right. This is how many words a blog post should be. Pay attention, that's actually my biggest takeaway is to pay attention to all the stuff that you're reading when you look at blog posts.
One thing I'll say that's kind of the marriage of the mission and the aesthetic side is if you are writing on your blog and you want to rank for something, you're trying to get more readers to your blog, rank, etc., whether it's a commercial interest or not. If you go and you look and you determine, I think I need to write 3,000 words about this topic to rank, and you don't have 3,000 words worth of stuff to say, but you're trying to get there, that really shows. It's like think back to junior high when you had to write a 500 word essay and you were about done by 300, and don't do that. Better to write an engaging post even if it's not as long as the other entries than to meander, because people are going to leave and it won't be a good ranking signal anyway. So outlining can help with that if you're trying to hit a word requirement, but
you are not Charles Dickens unless you are Charles Dickens and you're getting paid by the word, in which case, go nuts.
So I don't know, any closing thoughts on the subject of writing good blog posts? Oh, I have one. This is like a good bookender. Honestly, like I mentioned doing it for 10 years, and Amanda mentioned she thinks I'm at least a passable blogger. Practice is the best way that you can write good blog posts. Don't think that it's about some kind of innate talent and you either have it or you don't. Write 100 blog posts and you will be good at writing blog posts. I promise you.
Yes.
So practice is the biggest thing.
That's a great way to end it, and it's very true. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. We will see you again, probably next week at this time. Bye.